Excited to see everybody here. You are in for a great program today. In a few moments, we'll say our special thank yous to our guests.
Hello, everybody. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Colonel B.J. Red Dog Maynard. And now, he's not a stranger to this club, and actually many of you out here have worked with him on many projects. Now, after I became chairman of the Manatee District of the Southwest Florida Council of Boy Scouts of America, one of the first volunteers I met was Red Dog. And it didn't take me long to conclude that Red Dog was cut from the same mold as my scoutmaster of Troop 22, Colonel Ken W. Foster. Now, Red Dog is an expert at training boys to become men. He served in the United States Army for 37 years in 62 countries and has been decorated 42 times. He's got a bachelor's degree in history and 3 master's degrees. Red Dog's been married 56 years and has raised 2 Eagle Scouts. Now, he's been involved in the scouting movement since 1971, and he's never slowed down. And fortunately for Manatee County, Red Dog moved here in 1995 and has become one of the most impressive supporters of scouting, with his overwhelming desire to teach boys to become men in the scouting way. Now, Red Dog's going to talk about his new book, A Century in Scouting, which is a book every member of this club should pay attention to, because this club and its members over the almost 100 years have been interwoven into the scouting movement in Manatee County. And also, I might add that the book is a gift to all of us because it preserves the history of Manatee County. And I believe now we have a club book, don't we, Janine? We do. So there's no excuse. You can check the book out and read it. But before I bring up Red Dog, I want to talk to him about a couple other books he wrote. He is an author of 2 other books. One is called The Diamond on the Manatee, and it's the history of Camp Flying Eagle. And he also has written a delightful cookbook entitled, If It's Smoking, It's Cooking, and If It's Black, It's Done. And that sounds perfect for a lot of us that cook here. So I want you to join me in welcoming Red Dog to our luncheon, and I'm going to also ask Janine to come over and help me uncover.
Thanks, Your Honor, for that introduction. I thought you guys were sworn to tell the truth. I want to thank the Kiwanis Club for allowing me to come today, or invited me to come today and talk about my greatest second passion, and that's scouting. Before I do that, though, let me ask, are there anyone in the audience that was a scout as a youth? If you do, raise your hand. Wonderful. Well, if there are any Eagle Scouts in the audience, please raise your hand. My goodness, Rod, look around. And last, I'd like to ask if anyone in the audience has ever served as a volunteer leader to young men. Raise your hand. That's even greater, even greater. In 2005, the Scouts in Manatee County celebrated the 75th anniversary of Camp Flying Eagle. I was asked to research and compile the 75 years of that beautiful outdoor classroom. The result of my work, as the judge mentioned, was the diamond on the manatee, diamond being 75. The theme of the book that was Camp Flying Eagle in Manatee County has grown up together, and that the camp has become an integral part of the amenities of this county. In 2010, the Boy Scouts of America celebrated 100 years of serving the youth of America. Here in Manatee County, the Scouts decided to collect as much history of those 100 years as we could find and put it on public display. Amazingly, we found enough to fill 6 buildings over in the Palmetto Historical Park. It was then that I got the idea of reducing all that information, all that history, to a book. And I mentioned this to Judge Smith, who was our chairman at that time, and then for some reason or other, I forgot all about it. A couple of years later, the judge called me up one day, and he said, "Where are you on the book?" And I said, "I haven't started yet, Judge." And he said, "Get started, or I'm going to issue a bench warrant." I finished the research and writing the book, and it was published this past October. It's 454 pages long, a very extensive history, not only of scouting in this county, but basically everything that this county has been involved in. My theme of that book was that there are many things that make Manatee County great. Things like our beaches, our parks, our churches, our communities, our clubs, our organizations such as the Kiwanis Club, and certainly our families and our citizens. All are like strands in a rope. Separately, they all have identity, but collectively, they make up the strength of the rope. I wanted to write a book about one of those color strands, which of course was scouting. It was my goal to unravel the rope and show that scouting in Manatee County grew up together, and the title of that book was A Century of Scouting in Manatee County. Today I want to give you an overview of the book. The book starts out describing what life looked like to a boy here in Manatee County when the calendar turned from 1899 to 1900. Those of you who remember in your history in school, the industrial age had changed the way people worked in our nation, and we were well into the progressive era, and many changes were taking place in education, social activities, improving life in the towns, cities, and communities. It was ready for scouting. During the latter half of the 19th century, before the advent of modern cultural anthropology, a small group of youth leaders, naturalists, authors, and social reformers began to bring the wonders of nature to a wide audience through their writings and illustrations, not only in North America, but also in Europe. These were a group of people born in the later half of the 19th century, men who had special skills, willingness to take a chance, and the ability to recognize treasures when they saw it. Initially in Europe, their focus was directed in forming such organizations as the Worldwide Young Men's Christian Association and youth groups known as Boys' Brigades. In America, it was the League of Woodcraft Indians and the Sons of Daniel Boone. The founder of these groups were all blessed with a sense of extraordinary consciousness, and of course, they were all born at exactly the same time, so as to come together and create the greatest movement for youth in the history of the world. That movement became known as Boy Scouting. Unknown to them at that time, they were to have a profound effect on some 30 million youth in the next 100 years, first in England and then in the United States of America, and finally here in Manatee County. Here's how it unfolded. A lieutenant general in the British Army by the name of Robert Baden-Powell was concerned about the qualities of soldiers enlisted in the British Army. He observed that they were weak in character, in their citizenship duties, and in their personal growth. He decided to write a book to be used as a training manual that was to be for these young men so that they would become loyal, upright citizens, proficient soldiers devoted to the Crown of England. He named that book Aids to Scouting. Scouting was a term used to describe what the soldiers did while reconnoitering the enemy. Baden-Powell had no idea at the time that his book was published that it would become very popular with English teenagers. Teenagers found this on the newsstands in England, and they began to buy the books and look at the table of contents. And the young boys all over England began to use it to form gangs and to play games. At the urge of others, Baden-Powell rewrote the book, changing the name to Scouting for Boys. He then used it to begin the Scouting movement. That was in 1908. In 1909, a publisher from Chicago by the name of William Boyce, while in London, got lost in a fog. A young British teenager found him and led him to his destination. Boyce tried to give the young lad a tip, and the young lad refused it. Said, "No, sir, I'm a Boy Scout, and we do not take tips for good turns." While he was being guided to his destination, he began to probe the boy about what scouting was all about. The legend goes that next day, Boyce visits the Boy Scout headquarters in London, and when he returned to America, brought a trunk full of Scout literature with him. His initial idea was to use the Boy Scouts as a method to recruit and organize paper boys to sell his newspapers across America. After he returned, he incorporated the Boy Scouts of America in February 1910. He now owned the Boy Scouts of America with an idea to create paper boys out of them, but he had no idea how to do it. So he recruited a guy by the name of Edgar Robinson, who was the secretary of the YMCA chapter in Chicago, where Boyce was from. And he recruited another YMCA secretary that he knew was down in Washington, D.C., by the name of Colin Livingstone. He also knew two guys that had been working in youth organization. One was named Ernest Thomas Seton, and the other was Dan Carter Beard. So he called these four guys together. And he said, "I need some help. I want to organize this Boy Scouts of America into paper boys. Help me out." Well, they were able to convince Boyce not to do this, not to create paper boys out of them, but to use the original intent to make them Boy Scouts and train them for the things that Baden-Powell had organized the Scouts for. He agreed to do that, so they started out. All four of these guys also knew a lawyer in Washington, D.C. This lawyer was named James E. West, and he had been appointed by President Theodore Roosevelt to the Board of Pension Appeals in the Department of Interior. So they went to Roosevelt and asked him if they could borrow James E. West for 6 months. And Roosevelt agreed to it. Now, you lawyers in the audience probably remember James E. West because he was a big player in forming the, let me find it here. He was instrumental in establishing the juvenile court system. Did you guys know that? You didn't? Shame on y'all. It took me 3 years to find that out. Well, anyway, Roosevelt loaned James E. West to the Boy Scouts for 6 months. He ended up staying 32 years. He became the first Chief Scout Executive of the Boy Scouts. Meanwhile, down here in this little town called Bradenton, Florida, was another group of individuals, all born between 1881 and 1899. They were also destined to become local pioneer leaders, of the scouting movement. Some were born here, some migrated here. I looked at the 1910 census count for the population of Manatee County, and if you recall, in 1910, Sarasota, what is now Sarasota County, and Manatee County were one county. Well, the 1910 census showed there were 4,487 souls in Manatee County. 773 were in Palmetto, 2,874 were in Bradenton and the village of Manatee, and 840 in Sarasota. Among those 4,487 souls, there was a group of people who became very active in scouting immediately while the BSA was being organized. And the first gentleman I want to mention to you, you probably never heard of, was a guy by the name of Charles Mouse, M-A-U-S. And like Baden-Powell, Charles Mouse was born in England, but in 1909 he migrated to Bradenton, Florida. And he got hired as a school teacher at the only high school that existed back then, and that was Manatee High School. And they met down here where the current shuffleboard court is. All of you know where that thing is? And he was to teach the 9th grade class. And in those days, you had a class and you taught all subjects of the same class, the same teacher did. He had 9 boys in his class when school started. Now, he had evidently had either been a scout leader in England or he knew of Baden-Powell's work with scouting in England, because he asked the boys if they'd like to form a Boy Scout troop, and they asked him what it is, and he told them 6 of his 9 boys joined his troop. Meanwhile, another guy by the name of L.P. White, also an Englishman, and he was a bridge tender on the Palmetto to Bradenton Bridge. He organized a troop in June 1911. Now, Mouse formed his in 1910, in September, while the Boy Scouts of America was even being organized. But Mr. White organized his troop in 1911. And there's evidence that 3 other troops came into being in the year 1912 to 1914 here in Manatee County. One was organized in the town of Sarasota in 1913 with Clarence E. Hitchens as the scoutmaster. Anybody heard of Clarence E. Hitchens? Well, he was a big banker down there in that little town, and Hitchens later would become the first elected volunteer president of Sunnyland Council, and he was active in scouting for many years. The Christ Episcopal Church in Bradenton formed a troop sometime in 1914. I haven't been able to find the exact date yet, with the Reverend A.C. Kiefler serving as the scoutmaster. And then Palmetto organized a troop during the summer of 1914, and we think Virgil Willis was the scoutmaster of that troop, and he had about 10 or 12 boys in it, and we've identified 4 of those boys. One was Lyman McLeod, that's an old famous name here in town, Stuart Howes, Arthur C. Owens, and John D. Stewart. I also found a picture of these 4 scouts selling Liberty Bonds during World War I in front of the Palmetto City Hall. And what made that picture so interesting, those 4 boys are there, and they had 4 rifles stacked in front of their flag. Today, you know, the only place they have a rifle in their hand is on my BB range. I also found a scrapbook that Mrs. Julia Reasoner kept that said that the Bradenton Methodist Church, later to be known as the First United Methodist Church, formed Scout Troop 1 in 1917 with Lawton Moon as the scoutmaster. Now, I did some research on Lawton Moon, and he died from wounds received in France in 1918, and the troop failed to re-register. But in 1921, it was rechartered with Roland Shannon as scoutmaster and remained chartered until 1978. And I believe at one time Roland Shannon was a member of this club, of the Kiwanis Club. By 1925, there were 14 troops in this area, 8 in Manatee County and 6 in Sarasota County. And they were serviced by a council located in Lakeland, Florida, far, far away. However, on the night of December the 11th, 1925, a group of 100 scout leaders, scout supporters, and community leaders met in the Carnegie Library over in Palmetto for the purpose of organizing a council here in Bradenton and to grow and support scouting in our area. The name of that council was Sunnyland Council. They elected an executive board. Now here's some names that some of you may recognize. From Sarasota, C.E. Hitchens, Herbert Sawyer. From Sarasota, C.E. Hitchens, Herbert Sawyer, J.C. Peel, J. Claude Turner, G.L. Thacker, and T.W. Yarbrough. From Bradenton, Major H.P. Munich, S.H. Feifel, Dr. S.G. Hollingsworth, very famous physician here in town. I think at one time owned the only x-ray machine we had. H.P. Womack, T.A. Thornton, and Roland Shannon. From Palmetto, we had Judge William T. Harrison, George Blakely, H.C. Croft, P.J. Hackney, J.P. Harley, and B.F. Mount. And from the village of Manatee, W.H. Allison, W.G. Sparkman, and E.L. Vanderpipe. And finally from Teresita, H.E. Boyd. Now these gentlemen, along with Dan Blaylock, D.L. Thorpe, A.F. Wyman, O.F. Shelton, and a few others, were to guide Sunnyland Council for the first 15 years. Many of those people over there at that organizational meeting were members of this club, because this club I formed, I believe, in 1922, 23, somewhere along in there. So many of those 100 people over there in Palmetto that night belonged to this club. In 1928, Sarasota had grown in sufficient size that they felt that they could afford to hire a professional scouter as their scout executive. So they petitioned National to break away from Sunnyland, and that was granted. However, 4 years later, they were backlogged and paid to their scout executive for 2 years because they couldn't raise enough money to pay him. So he quit. So they rejoined Sunnyland Council. Now, I think it was in 1927, they formed some troops down in Fort Myer in a council they called the Royal Palm Council. And I'll tell you about them in a few minutes, but back to Sunnyland Council. In 1929, they'd found a piece of property out east of here on the river that belonged to Miss Minnie Harris. And they wanted to buy this 140 acres of land, and she wanted $2,000 for it. Well, they didn't have that much kind of money in the Sunnyland Council, so they went to the bank. I believe it was the American National Bank, which is right across from that time was right across from the Methodist Church here in town, to borrow money. And they said, "Who are you?" And they said, "We are the Boy Scouts of America." And they said, "We can't loan you money. We can only loan money to people or to chartered organizations." So they turned them down. Well, out of that group, when that turned down, there was 7 or 8 people that got together and formed something called the Manatee County Boys Development Association. Remember those guys, Cliff? We spent a lot of time on that, didn't we? Anyway, Judge William Harrison, Dan Blaylock, Sr., and L.F. Vaught, S.E. Simmons, A.F. Wyman, Harry Groff, O.W. Shelton, Daniel Thorpe, William Tucker, J.P. Harley, formed the Manatee County Boys Development Association and applied to the state of Florida for a charter. They were granted that. They went to the bank and they loaned the money, and they began to sell the property out at Camp Flying Eagle, 1 acre for $15. You just bought a share in the camp. You didn't buy the actual acre, but you bought a share. And they were able to pay the loan off in 2 years. They then leased the property to Sunnyland for 100 years at $1 a year. In 1985, BDA gifted the property to the Boy Scouts of America to be used permanently as a camp for youth. In 1937, back now to this council down in Southwest Florida, down in Fort Myers, which was known as the Royal Palm Council, they got behind in paying their money because they couldn't raise enough, so they petitioned to join Sunnyland. So now they joined us in 1937, and our Sunnyland Council reached from the big bridge on the north of here to the little bridge south of Naples. And that was our Sunnyland Council at that time. After World War II was over, scouting was in its heyday, and troops began to jump up all over the place and grow. So those 5 counties by 1968 down south that had been in the old Royal Palm now had enough citizens that they could get enough money to pay their scout executive, asked to break away and form their council again. And National gave them the permission, and they named it the Southwest Florida Council. And so in 1968, that occurred, and scouting was back to 2 counties, Sunnyland, Manatee and Sarasota. Now, scouting remains strong in Manatee County. We currently have 14 packs, 15 troops, 3 venturing crews, and a Sea Scout ship. And I would like to add that for 106 years, a 12th Circuit judge has been part of the scouting movement in Manatee County. First, Judge William T. Harrison from 1925 to 1958. Then Judge Robert Hensley, bless his soul, from the mid-1950s to his death a few years ago, and now Judge Gilbert Smith. One other historical fact I want to leave with you is this. On February the 22nd, 1928, Warren Saunders from Troop 3 in Old Nico became the first Eagle Scout in Manatee County to earn the Eagle Award. Last Tuesday night, I sat on the Eagle Board, and we awarded Benjamin Price of Troop 89 his Eagle Award, and he became the 746th Manatee Scout to earn Eagle. $746 in almost 90 years. My time has expired, and as Paul Harvey often said, if you want to know the rest of the story, you'll have to read my book. Thank you for listening.
Red Dog has agreed to stay after to answer everyone's questions. If you ask him kindly, he'll also autograph the books which are available here, both the cookbook and the history of scouting. I want to personally thank him. He has personally inscribed a book and presented it to our club today, which is available for you to peruse, but if you want to read it, buy your own copy. And so with that, we want to thank him by giving him our traditional Kiwanis golden rule to measure his future success and also the many inches of new books.
Thank you. You know, I have to be nice to this lady because I taught her how to shoot, and she's threatened me if I'm not nice, she's going to demonstrate how to shoot towards me.
So, with that, a reminder, we are not going to meet next week. Please enjoy your family, your friends, and reach out to others that may not have a place for Christmas. And remember to invite guests for our meeting on January 3rd to celebrate all of our charitable giving. With that, we are adjourned.